She wore red to my father's funeral. She smirked at me during the reading of the will. Then the lawyer opened the second folder, the one with my name on it. "What folder?" Veronica's voice cut through the lawyer's office like a blade. The red dress had been replaced with a black Chanel suit, but the predatory gleam in her eyes remained the same. "Richard told me everything went to me. The house, the accounts, the investments, everything." Mr. Patterson, my father's lawyer for 30 years, adjusted his glasses with the careful precision of a man about to detonate a bomb. "Mrs. Morrison, your late husband was very specific in his instructions. There are 2 parts to the estate settlement." I sat quietly in the corner, the same spot I'd occupied for the past hour while Veronica preened over her inheritance. "The house in Westchester, 7 bedrooms, pool house, the gardens my mother had designed before cancer took her. The vacation home in the Hamptons, the apartment in the city. All of it now belonged to the woman who'd married my father 3 years ago, when his loneliness finally overcame his judgment." "The properties are yours," Patterson continued, "as specified in the will dated 18 months ago." "Exactly." Veronica's manicured fingers drummed on the mahogany table. "So, what's this about a second folder?" Patterson opened the manila folder marked with my name, Emma Morrison, in my father's careful handwriting. "This pertains to the liquid assets, the investment accounts, the bonds, the stake in Morrison Industries, and various other financial instruments." The drumming stopped. "Those are mine too. Richard said—" "What Richard said and what Richard did were sometimes different things," Patterson interrupted, something I'd never seen him do in all the years I'd known him. "6 months ago, your husband established an irrevocable trust. The beneficiary is his daughter, Emma." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the traffic 20 floors below. Veronica's face went through a series of transformations: confusion, disbelief, and finally, rage. "That's impossible. He wouldn't. He loved me. He told me everything was mine." "The properties are," Patterson said calmly. "However, the liquid assets, approximately $8.7 million, plus the ongoing dividends from Morrison Industries, are held in trust for Emma." I watched Veronica calculate, her lips moving slightly as she did the math. "The houses were worth millions, certainly. The Westchester house alone was valued at $4 million. But I knew what she didn't yet understand: the cost of maintaining those properties, the taxes, the staff, the endless upkeep that my father had always paid for out of his investment income." "This is fraud," Veronica said, standing abruptly. "He wasn't in his right mind. The cancer, the medications, he didn't know what he was doing." "On the contrary," Patterson pulled out another document. "Mr. Morrison underwent a cognitive evaluation the same day he established the trust. 2 independent psychiatrists confirmed he was of sound mind. He also left this." Patterson handed me a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter in my father's shaky handwriting. "My dearest Emma, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're probably sitting in Patterson's office wondering why I let Veronica have the houses. The truth is, I didn't have the courage to divorce her. I was weak, afraid of being alone again after finding someone who seemed to care. But I wasn't blind. I saw how she treated you, how she slowly pushed you away, convinced me to miss your birthday dinner, your promotion celebration, even your engagement party. I saw the satisfaction in her eyes every time she succeeded in keeping us apart. The houses are her prison, Emma. She wanted them so badly. Let her have them. But know that every penny that actually mattered, every investment I made thinking of your future, is yours. She can sit in that empty mansion and realize that ownership without means is just an expensive grave. Forgive me for not being stronger. Your loving father. I folded the letter carefully, aware of Veronica's eyes on me. What does it say? She demanded. Goodbye, I said simply. Veronica turned back to Patterson. I'll contest this. No judge will uphold. You're welcome to try, Patterson said. However, I should mention that contesting the trust would automatically trigger Clause 7B. What's Clause 7B? Patterson smiled. Actually smiled. It states that any attempt to contest the trust results in an immediate audit of all property transfers and financial gifts received during the marriage. Every piece of jewelry, every car, every credit card purchase over $500 would need to be accounted for and potentially returned to the estate. I thought about the Cartier watches, the Birkin bags, the Mercedes SL that Veronica had insisted she needed. The shopping sprees that had concerned my father, but that he'd never denied her. The investments in her friends' businesses that never materialized into anything. Furthermore, Patterson continued, Mr. Morrison kept meticulous records. Every gift is documented. Should you contest and lose, which you would, you could be liable for the estate's legal fees as well. Veronica sank back into her chair. For the first time since she'd entered my father's life, she looked her age. The Botox couldn't hide the panic in her eyes. The property taxes alone on the 3 houses total approximately $300,000 annually, Patterson said, his voice almost gentle now. The maintenance, utilities, and staff costs add another $400,000. The houses are yours, Mrs. Morrison, but I would strongly advise you to consider selling at least one of them quickly. Staff? Veronica's voice was weak. Richard always handled that. Through the estate accounts, yes, which are now in Emma's trust. You'll need to handle those payments yourself going forward. I thought back to how this all started, to the day 3.5 years ago when my father met Veronica at the charity gala for the hospital where my mother had been treated. She'd approached him during the silent auction, admiring his bid on a week in Tuscany. She was beautiful, sophisticated, 20 years younger than him, and she laughed at his stories about his Navy days. My father, 18 months a widower, was enchanted. The courtship was whirlwind, dinners at the club, weekends at the Hampton House, trips to Europe. I watched from the sidelines, my concern dismissed as jealousy. Emma doesn't understand. He'd told me 6 months into their relationship. She makes me feel alive again. Your mother would want me to be happy. My mother would have seen through Veronica in 30 seconds. But I kept that thought to myself. The wedding was small but elegant. Veronica's choice. Just family, she'd said, though her family consisted of a sister who flew in from Vegas and a cousin who spent the reception trying to network with my father's business associates. My family consisted of me, my husband David, and our 2 teenage children. My father's brothers flew in from Seattle and Boston, took one look at Veronica, and exchanged the kind of glances that said everything without words. After the wedding, the isolation began slowly. First, it was the standing Tuesday dinners my father and I had maintained since my mother's death. Richard's tired on Tuesdays now, Veronica would say. You know, his golf game wears him out. Maybe we could do every other week? Every other week became once a month. Once a month became holidays only, and even those became negotiations. We're thinking of doing Thanksgiving in Paris this year, she announced the November after their wedding. Just the 2 of us. You understand, don't you, Emma? Newlyweds need their alone time. They were in their 60s. The newlywed excuse was almost laughable, but the masterstroke was how she handled my father's illness. The pancreatic cancer diagnosis came 2 years into their marriage. I found out not from my father, not from a phone call, but from his oncologist's office when they called looking for him and accidentally reached me instead of Veronica. Mrs. Morrison, We need to schedule your follow-up appointment. This is Emma Morrison. I think you want my stepmother. Oh, I apologize. Could you have Mr. Morrison call us? It's regarding his treatment plan. What treatment plan? The silence on the other end told me everything. I drove to the house that afternoon, finding my father in his study, noticeably thinner, reading one of his military histories. Dad, why didn't you tell me? He looked up, and for a moment, I saw fear in his eyes. Not fear of the cancer, but fear of Veronica. She thought it best not to worry you, he said quietly. You have so much on your plate with the kids and David's job transfer. Dad, you have cancer. That trumps everything. Veronica's been handling everything. She's been wonderful, really. She had been handling everything, limiting his visitors, screening his calls, controlling the narrative. When I tried to come by for treatments, she scheduled them for times she knew I couldn't make it. When I called, she answered his phone, explaining he was resting and couldn't be disturbed. But she made one crucial mistake. She underestimated my father's intelligence and his Navy training in strategic planning. While she was controlling his present, he was planning for the future. Every slight against me, every manipulation, every casual cruelty, he documented it all. He met with Patterson in secret, using his golf games as cover. He had the cognitive evaluation done during what Veronica thought was a routine checkup. He moved money quietly, legally, irrevocably. Standing now in Patterson's office, watching Veronica's world crumble, I understood the full scope of my father's final mission. You can't leave me with nothing, Veronica said, her voice breaking. I'm his widow. I nursed him through cancer. You isolated him, I said, finally speaking directly to her. You kept his family away. You turned his last years into a prison of your making. I loved him. You loved his portfolio. You loved the houses and the status and the invitations to charity galas. You loved being Mrs. Richard Morrison. But him? The man who liked to read military history and tend his roses and watch old movies on Sunday afternoons? You barely knew he existed. I pulled out my phone and showed her a video. It was from 2 months before he died, taken by my daughter during one of the rare visits Veronica had allowed. My father was in the garden, showing his granddaughter how to prune roses, his voice weak but animated as he explained the importance of cutting above the 5-leaf stems. This is who he was, I said. A teacher, a gardener, a grandfather? When was the last time you saw him in his garden? When did you ever ask about his roses? Veronica's response was telling. She looked away. Patterson cleared his throat. There's one more matter. Mr. Morrison left a separate fund for the house staff. Jorge, Linda, the gardening crew. 6 months severance and glowing recommendations. They're free to seek other employment immediately. But I need them. I'm sure you can find new staff, Patterson said. Though I should mention, Mr. Morrison also left letters for each of them, explaining the situation and suggesting they might want to seek employment elsewhere regardless. The full implications hit Veronica then. Not just the money, but the complete dismantling of the life she'd constructed. The staff who knew where everything was, how everything worked, who kept the massive houses running, they'd all leave. She'd be alone in that 7-bedroom monument to her greed, unable to afford help, unable to maintain the facade. Emma, please, she said, and for the first time, I heard real fear in her voice. We're family. Your father would want... My father wanted a lot of things, I interrupted. He wanted my mother to survive cancer. He wanted to not be lonely. He wanted to believe you loved him for who he was, not what he had. He didn't get any of those things. But he did get the last word. I stood to leave, gathering my coat and purse. As I reached the door, I turned back. The red dress, Veronica, my mother's favorite color. She wore red to every important event. Her wedding, my christening, her last anniversary with Dad before she got sick. He told you that story at least a dozen times. I heard him tell it to you myself at your rehearsal dinner. You wore red to mock him, to mock her memory, to mock me. That's who you are. Someone who would use a dying man's precious memories as a weapon. You don't understand? I understand perfectly. You won. You got the kingdom. Every brick, every board, every blade of grass. Enjoy ruling over your empty empire. I left her there, in Patterson's office, still staring at the papers that gave her everything she'd wanted and nothing she needed. 3 months later, the Westchester house went on the market. I drove by occasionally, watching the gardens my mother designed grow wild, the roses my father tended withering from neglect. The for sale sign stayed up for 6 months, the price dropping twice, before it finally sold to a developer who planned to tear it down and build condos. Jorge called me the day before the closing. She's selling everything, Miss Emma. The furniture, the art, even your father's books. Let her, I said, though it stung. They're just things. But I did buy back certain items when they appeared at estate sales. My mother's piano, my father's Navy medals, the first edition Hemingway he'd bought her for their anniversary. Veronica needed the money too badly to notice who was buying. The Hampton house sold next, then the city apartment. Each sale was below market value. Panic sales to cover debts and taxes she couldn't manage. The woman who'd once spent $30,000 on a handbag was now counting pennies, trying to stretch the property sales to cover her expenses. I heard through mutual acquaintances about her gradual descent. First, a smaller apartment in the city, then a rental in Queens, then moving in with her sister in New Jersey. The society friends disappeared once the parties stopped. The charity committees found reasons to need her spot for someone else. The Mrs. Morrison identity she'd killed for became meaningless without the money to back it up. A year after the funeral, Patterson called with one final revelation. Your father left something else. He said to wait a year before giving it to you. It was a safety deposit box key and a letter. Emma, in this box is your mother's jewelry, the pieces Veronica thought were sold to pay for her shopping sprees. I told her I'd sold them, even created fake receipts. But these were your mother's, meant for you and eventually your daughter. There's also something else. A recording I made 3 months before I died. Use it if you ever doubt that you did the right thing by accepting my plan. The recording was of Veronica, speaking to someone on the phone, not knowing my father had come home early from treatment. He won't last another 6 months. The idiot still thinks I care about his war stories and his stupid roses. Once he's gone, I'll sell everything, move to the city properly. No more pretending to care about his boring daughter or those brat grandchildren. I've earned this, playing nurse to a dying old fool. My father's voice came on after, steady despite everything. She's wrong about one thing. I will last another 6 months. Long enough to ensure she gets exactly what she deserves, everything she wanted and nothing she needs. I kept the recording, but never used it. There was no point. Veronica's own choices had been her downfall. The woman who'd worn red to mock my father's grief, who'd smirked as she thought she'd won everything, had discovered that victory without resources is just another form of defeat. 5 years later, I ran into her at a grocery store in New Jersey. She was working as a cashier, her face older, harder, the designer clothes replaced with a polyester uniform. She saw me, started to speak, then simply looked away. There was nothing left to say. My father's trust had done more than secure my future. It had given me the freedom to start a foundation in my parents' names, supporting cancer research and widower support groups. It paid for my children's education, let me leave my corporate job to run the nonprofit full-time. It gave me the life my father had always wanted for me, free from the toxic influence of someone who saw family only as a resource to be exploited. The red dress at the funeral had been Veronica's victory lap, her declaration that she'd won. The smirk during the will reading was her certainty that my father had been too weak, too manipulated to fight back. But the second folder, the one with my name on it, that was my father's response. Not just money, but a message. I saw everything. I knew everything. And I chose my daughter. In the end, Veronica got exactly what she'd demanded. All the houses, all the property, all the visible symbols of wealth, and I got what my father had carefully, secretly, lovingly preserved. The future, the freedom, and the final word. She wore red to his funeral, thinking she'd won everything. She had no idea she'd already lost.